swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Sit down, please, and make yourself comfortable.
Thanks
Can you
very
confirm,
much.
please, your full name?
Joanne Kathleen Rowling.
What I'm going to invite you to do is to confirm your witness statement. It's in that file in front of you under tab 1. It runs over 33 pages, and at the end of it you'll see, I hope, your name, your signature, a date, which is the 2nd of November, and the usual statement of truth. So this is your evidence.
It is.
Thank you.
Can I move now, please, to paragraph 3 of your witness statement?
Yes.
Well, you make it clear that you have no personal vendetta
Absolutely.
against the press at all. What are your views about freedom of the press, please?
I believe very, very strongly in freedom of the press and freedom of expression. And I would like to make it clear from the start that I think that there's alongside the kind of journalism that we're going to be talking about today, I think there is truly heroic journalism in Britain. I suppose my view is that we have, at the one end of the spectrum, people who literally risk their lives to go and expose the truth about war and famine and revolution. And then at the other end, we have behaviour that is illegal and I think unjustifiably intrusive. So I wonder sometimes why they're given the same name, why they're called the same thing. We should maybe invent a new word for the second group.
And in paragraph 4 of your witness statement, you recognise that at least at the start of your career, media interest had some beneficial effect on the sales of your book. Is that right?
I'd say so. I'd say it's a very interesting question with regard to Harry Potter in particular, because in 1997, when the first book was published, the traditional media was really the only game in town if a creative person wanted to say that they'd written a book or a film or anything of that sort. But during the 10 years that Harry Potter was published, of course, the internet became a huge game changer. And my fans were primarily young people who were very internet savvy. So I think the internet became, for Harry Potter, arguably as great, if not a greater, promotional tool. But yes, in the beginning, certainly, press was helpful.
Yes. So that's, as it were, the good side of journalism. But in paragraph 5, you immediately move to what you describe as a different kind of journalistic activity, and it culminated, as you explain, in you literally being driven out of your first house.
Yeah.
Can you give us an approximate date for that, please?
I moved, that was the first house that I'd ever owned, and I bought that with advances that I'd received on the first Harry Potter book, particularly from America. So we moved into that house in 97, and we left that house in 99. So during those 2 years, it had really become untenable to remain in that house.
Yes. And it was the result of what which made it untenable?
Doorstepping. A photograph had been published that showed not only the number of the house but also the name of the street, which happened to be on the building where I was living. So I really was a sitting duck for anyone who wanted to find me. Journalists sitting outside in cars and so on. And because the street, when I bought the house, obviously I didn't know what was coming. I didn't know that I was going to make a considerable amount of money. I had bought within my means, and this house lay directly on the street, so I really couldn't have chosen a worse property for someone who was going to receive that kind of press attention.
Thank you. Now you explain quite generally, we'll deal with the detail later in paragraph 7, that you've had no choice but to take action against the press, both through the PCC, the Press Complaints Commission, and the courts. And the number of times you've had to engage solicitors in this sort of case, you numbered about 50, is that right?
Probably, yes.
And does that cover both the PCC and litigation, or just litigation?
Yes, it might be more, but as far as I can tell, roughly that, yeah.
And the main concerns you wish to express relate to perhaps this is the foremost concern, but you'll tell me if this is right or wrong, privacy of your children.
Definitely.
Then there's a privacy of your home, and then there's the broader issue of fair treatment by the press. Is that correct? Privacy of your children first, please. You deal with this in paragraph 9. And when your first novel came out, I hope you don't mind me dealing with this, it's in the public domain, you were a single mother, is that correct?
Yes, that's the case.
So what was your attitude or strategy, if you had one, in relation to any publicity, first as regards the book, and secondly, protection of your child? Could you assist the inquiry with that, please?
Well, I took the view then, and I would like to say that I'm not, certainly wouldn't like to be seen to be standing in judgment on anyone who took a different view, because there are people I know and respect who have taken a different view on this. But it was my belief, and it remains my belief, that children do best when they are kept out of the public eye, and that their home life is secure, and that means, and it feels like a place of safety, and I think that means private. So I endeavoured from the very first to draw a very clear line between what I considered unwarrantable intrusion into my private life, and that was largely my daughter. For example, I had countless requests to be photographed with my daughter. I vividly remember a woman's magazine who wanted to take a photograph of me with my broken down typewriter and my daughter on my knee. And when I said that is absolutely not happening, they said, well, we won't do the interview then, which was no loss to me. I really did not want that to happen. I think it's one reason I agreed to appear, because I think this is something I feel very strongly. When you become well known, and it was a shock to me that I became so well known so quickly, no one gives you a guidebook. There is nothing is handed to you to say, well, you can do route A, B, or C. You have to make it up to an extent yourself. And I inferred from the press's often justification for printing photographs of people's families. Their justification was so frequently, well, you have sold your family life, you've invited them into your home, you've allowed photographers to take pictures of your children, you have in effect used your family as a promotional tool. So I inferred from that if I do not do those things, the privacy of my children will be, well, at that time, my only child, will be respected. So I was trying hard to abide by what I thought was the unwritten code. And I would say that I think a significant section of the press have respected my stance on that, but a significant section of the press, in my view, have seen that almost as a challenge. So I tried very hard to abide by what I thought were the rules, and I failed.
And you mentioned one occasion, but it was the only occasion, paragraph 10 of your witness statement, where you took your daughter along to a book award ceremony. Someone did try and take a group photograph, and that never happened again.
No, well, I never took her anywhere like that again. I vividly remember that occasion. It was I was thrilled to have received the award, and I couldn't get a babysitter, and I took her. I knew other children were going to be there, and it's not that I don't want my children to share these occasions with me, but that experience taught me that can't happen. Because, as I say, she was marched into a shot, and I physically said, no, I don't want that to happen, and took her away. And after that, I decided, well, clearly the way forward is not to take my children to these kinds of events.
Yes. In paragraph 12, you deal with 3 causes which you support. Would you like to cover those specifically? Yes. Please do.
I think it's relevant to say that I have on occasions discussed my own, not my children's, but my own life. And I suppose broadly speaking, there are 3 areas of my life that are quite private that I have discussed. When I wrote the first book as a single parent, and that was common knowledge, and I wasn't ashamed of that, and did discuss that, the fact that we had lived on benefits for a time and it had been difficult to find work and find childcare. All of these things I did talk about, and latterly I tried to parlay that into doing something meaningful, because I became an ambassador for a charity that campaigns for lone parents. And then I've also said in my statement that I, for quite a long time, was patron of the MS Society, and I fund research and attempt to raise funds for MS. My mother died of complications from multiple sclerosis. It's not something that I relish talking about, but I talk about it with a purpose. And I think that that's one of the upsides, if you like, of being well known, that you can become a spokesperson for those kind of charities. And then the last thing I've said in my witness statement, I have talked openly about the fact that I have suffered from depression. I think originally I discussed this in the context of my work. And I do feel quite strongly that as a writer or any kind of creative person, your life becomes such an important factor in your work. There are themes in my work that relate to bereavement or depression or things that I myself have experienced. So in other words, I was talking about depression, not trying to gain sympathy or pity, but there was a purpose. I had created certain creatures in the Harry Potter books that had the effect of depression on those they encountered. But I don't in any sense regret talking about depression, because as I say in my statement, I've received a number of letters and so forth, particularly from young people who've been depressed, who find it helpful that people don't treat that as something to be ashamed of. So yes, I have discussed these matters, but I would say firstly that I think our cultural life would be greatly diminished if creative people weren't allowed to say where they received inspiration or ideas. And I would say secondly that I don't think any reasonable person could decide that because I discuss these things, my children ought to be long-lensed in swimsuits. I think a reasonable person would see a clear division there.
Yes. Thank you. And then in paragraph 13, you develop the point which you've already touched on, namely the importance of a normal childhood for your children. Mm-hmm. You mentioned one incident where there was a note from a journalist slipped into your daughter's school bag.
Yes.
Could you give us a little bit more context?
Yes, my daughter, this was my oldest daughter. So this would have been when I was really in the first burst of publicity surrounding me. She was in her first year at primary school, and I unzipped her school bag in the evening, and among the usual letters from school and debris that every child generates, I found an envelope addressed to me and a journalist. Now, it's a journalist. The letter was from a journalist, so it's my recollection that the letter said that he intended to ask a mother at the school to put this in my daughter's bag, or I know no more than that. I don't know whether that's how the letter got in my daughter's school bag or not. But I can only say that I felt such a sense of invasion that my daughter's bag. It's very difficult to say how angry and how angry I felt that my 5-year-old daughter's school was no longer a place of, complete security from journalists.
Yes. Paragraph 14. Your position is very clearly stated in the second line. My husband and I have taken every step we could think of to prevent the children being photographed by press photographers. And then you outline some of the measures you've taken. Some are quite general, some are quite specific.
Yes.
Would you care to elaborate on any of those, please, for us, Ms. Rowling?
Well, we have. I say in our statement, for example, we didn't take a honeymoon immediately after. We were married because We had previously taken a holiday together shortly before we were married, and that was the occasion on which we were all long-lensed and my daughter appeared in the press in her swimsuit. So we decided that we went to great lengths to ensure that our wedding itself was private. There are many things you can do, and we have tried to do all of them, I would say. We really have tried to do all of them to prevent the children being photographed.
Yes. In paragraph 15, occasions where paparazzi have been outside your house, you've had to, on occasion, hide your children in blankets.
Well, there were two particularly bad periods where it really was like being under siege or being a hostage. After the birth of each of my subsequent children, for a week, it was impossible for me to leave the house without being photographed, unless I wanted to be photographed, or unless I wanted the children photographed. And on both of those occasions, they took up permanent residence outside our house. And my husband was obviously going to work, and he was going in and out through them and was being photographed. But I felt completely trapped in the house. And of course, that had a massive effect on the children.
And you've made it clear, you clearly state in paragraph 17, press photographers, agencies, perhaps more importantly even picture editors at newspapers, magazines and other media outlets, how seriously you take the privacy of your children. Have you done this by making statements to them, or how has this been achieved?
I think I've gone to such lengths to try and prevent photography of my children that they really can be in no doubt. And I have complained to the PCC, and as is clear later in the statement, I've been to court. I would like to say that, particularly with regard to photographers outside our house, I think a very good example of this is two journalists from a Scottish tabloid took up residence outside our house in a car at a time when I was absolutely unaware that there was particular interest in me. I didn't have a book coming out, I hadn't just given birth, they were just sitting there. So I asked someone who works for the public relations company that I employ to please ask them what they wanted. And the response she received was, "It's a boring day at the office." So my family and I were literally under surveillance for their amusement. There wasn't even a pretense that there was a story. But it's difficult to explain to people who haven't experienced it what that feels like. The twist in the stomach, because you wonder, what do they want? What do they think they've got? It's incredibly threatening. It feels threatening to have people watching you.
And then you quite rightly state that the Sun published an article on the 25th of March 2003, absolutely no criticism of that, but they rightly said the 38-year-old author is fiercely protective of her private life and kept details of her son's birth top secret.
Yes.
Accurately stating the position. You give us some specific examples, starting at paragraph 21. The picture in 2001 in OK magazine when your child was then 8,
Yes.
I think.
Yes.
And that was on was it a public beach or a private beach? You tell us.
Well, this is where it all went wrong, because my husband and I weren't married then. It was shortly before we were married. We were wrongly convinced that we were on a private beach. We subsequently discovered that no beach in Mauritius is private. They're all public by law. But the hotel we were staying at had advertised that it had its own beach, and we wrongly understood from that it was private. So we believed ourselves to be in a private situation. My husband, who's more observant than I, clearly said he was worried about a boat that was a little way out while we were all on the beach, and I dismissed this and said I was sure everything was fine, and he was being paranoid. And he wasn't being paranoid at all. We were being long-lensed, and when we arrived home, it was to photographs of the two of us, not my daughter. The photographs, including my daughter, weren't published at first on the beach.
is that it led to a complaint to the PCC.
Yes.
You have the adjudication under tab 2 there, Miss Rowling.
Yes.
And the complaint was upheld.
Yes.
As you know, that the...
This was the complaint about the photographs of my daughter, including my daughter.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
And the public-private beach point was not one which, as it were, lost you the case.
Mm-hmm.
You won the case because of the particular circumstances. The code entitles everyone of all ages to respect for their private and family life and deems unacceptable the use of long-lens photography to take pictures of people in places where they have a reasonable expectation of privacy.
Mm-hmm.
In addition, it gives greater protection to children, does not allow photographs of children under the age of 16 to be taken where the child's welfare is involved, and requires a justification other than the fame of a child's parent for publishing material about the private life of a child. There may also be an exceptional public interest justification for breaching these provisions, but none was provided in this case. The Commission noted that it was not in dispute that Miss Rowling had gone to considerable lengths in the past to protect her daughter's privacy. This seemed to have been reflected in her selection of the holiday location. Mm-hmm. It had not been challenged that the beach was not overlooked by other holiday apartments and that the family had gone there in the low season to avoid unwanted attention. The Commission was not asked to consider whether the photographs of the complainant and her partner breached the code, but it considered in the circumstances outlined above, and given the high level of protection afforded by the code to children, photographs of the complainant's daughter should not have been taken or published and therefore breached Clause 3. Well, you would presumably agree with every word of that decision, Ms. Rowling.
I would agree with every word of that, yes.
Do we need to go on to the complaint under Clause 6? Will if you like.
May I say one thing about
Yes,
the
of course.
photograph of that photograph of my daughter in her swimsuit? Unlike an untruth that is in print, for which you can at least receive an apology, when an image is disseminated, it can spread around the world like a virus. And that photograph of my daughter in her swimsuit was on the internet months after the PCC ruling. Now, of course, I accept that the PCC could not adjudicate for members of the public who had copied the image and put it up on websites, and that they had no mechanism to prevent that happening. But I feel that given the fact that an image has a life that cannot be recalled once you have seen what someone looks like in their swimwear, an apology does not remove that knowledge from everyone else. An image has a particular property in that way. So I needed to, I contacted my lawyers when I realised this image was still out there, and they laboriously attempted to remove it wherever they could. I'm sure it is still out there. That's the particular harm of an image.
Yes. Well, the analysis of the PCC, in line with their standard practice, is to divide your case up into different parts of the code. Mm-hmm. We've been looking at Clause 3, which is privacy, mm-hmm. although the age of your child is of course a relevant factor, but then they deal separately with Clause 6, which is the children issue, and on a separate basis they uphold the complaint there, which perhaps are hardly surprising given their reasoning in relation to Clause 3. It's noteworthy, though, in relation to Clause 3, that the Commission have weighed up a number of factors, and it may not be clear which factor is determinative, but mm-hmm. They've considered all the circumstances of your case, which some may say demonstrates that these issues are not always straightforward ones. Would you accept that or not? Although, of course, you clearly won this case.
Well, where children are concerned, it's my personal belief that the issue is not complex at all. A child, no matter who their parents are, I think deserves privacy.
Yes.
They have no choice in who their parents are. They have no choice in how their parents behave. So I would respectfully say that I think where children are concerned, the issue is fairly black and white, and I think it would have to be extraordinary public interest to justify publication of photographs of children. particularly without their consent.
The next sequence of evidence you're about to give is slightly more complicated legally, and it's the Marian Big Pictures litigation. It's, well, in a nutshell, tell us what happened on the 8th of November 2004 before we look at the legal consequences of it, Rowling.
This was an occasion, I was fairly heavily pregnant with my third child. Most unusually, my husband had a morning off. And this is relevant in that we very rarely went out at this time of day together. So it's our belief that, again, people were watching the house on the off chance without any particular justification. Anyway, it so happened that we took a walk to a local cafe. Most people, I think, would say that's a very innocuous thing to do as a family. And we were photographed covertly going to the cafe. Didn't realise that had happened. Only subsequently did we realise, when we saw the photos, that it must have been happening before we hit the cafe and afterwards, because afterwards we did then see the man running down the road to get a better angle of us with our son. My oldest daughter was then at school, and so this was now my middle child, my son, who was being photographed.
Yes. And the photographs were published,
yes.
And as you explain, one of the newspapers published a photograph that clearly showed your son's face. And what had happened, as very often happens, a picture agency had taken the photograph. In this particular instance, it happened to be a company called Big Pictures Limited, and they sold it on perhaps to the highest bidder.
Yes, that's
right?
My understanding of what happened, yes.
You then brought proceedings and sought an injunction as well as damages for breach of confidence and breach of privacy. And at the first stage, before the High Court judge, your claim was struck out.
Yes.
Is that right?
May I just say, before we move on to that point, so there was a reason why I didn't go to the PCC. It had been my hope, perhaps hope more than belief, but my strong hope that the PCC adjudication of my eldest daughter would send notice to the press that I took it extremely seriously if they invade my children's privacy. And clearly the message had not been strong enough. Sanctions had not been imposed that would make anyone think twice about this, and they had again bought photographs of my child, a different child, but of my child. So that's why we didn't go back to the PCC. That's why now we went a step further, and our intention was to underline our position on this.
Yes. The argument of the defendant newspaper, which at first instance was accepted, then was reversed on appeal, was that this was a public place, there was no harassment, therefore there was no confidence or privacy which could be protected.
Well, I disagree, as you would expect, on a number of counts there.
Yes.
First of all, that there was no harassment.
Yes. I'm just setting out the argument.
No, I know,
we
but
know the Court of Appeal came to a different view.
They did, but yes, we were extremely disappointed that that was the response of the court in the first instance.
You had a right of appeal, you exercised it, and on the 7th of May 2008, the Court of Appeal, presided over by the then Master of the Rolls, Sir Anthony Clark, found in your favour. The judgment is, of course, publicly available. We provided it to you in our bundle at tab 5.
Yes.
You, if I may say so, have correctly summarised it in your witness statement
Yes.
at paragraph 28.
Yes.
I mean, so that it is understood, given the way this went off procedurally, the Court of Appeal were deciding that you had an arguable case. They weren't deciding whether you were going to win or lose at the end of the day. Although the result of the Court of Appeal's judgment is that in the end there was a settlement of the case to your satisfaction. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And the judgment does bear reading in full. It is a detailed and legally sophisticated judgment. I'm not going to take time with it because I couldn't possibly do justice to it by summarising it. But you, in paragraph 28, subparagraphs A to E, have identified the key features. And of course, unsurprisingly, a very key feature here is the fact that we are concerned with the rights of a child.
Yes.
In paragraph 29, you explain why you decided to bring this case. You've given us one of the reasons. You'd lost confidence in the PCC, and this was really the failure of the press to respond positively to the adjudication following the Hello publication in 2001.
Yes.
That's your second reason. Your first reason at 29A, please, Miss Rowling. Might you elaborate that for us, please?
There had been another incident shortly after my son was born, so I had at this point a 10-year-old daughter and a virtually newborn baby. So we were besieged for a week, and then I believed that the photographers had disappeared. And for the first time in a week, I was able to get out of the house with my daughter and the baby. And we were long-lensed. And on this occasion, I saw the photographer taking the picture from across the street. I pulled my daughter behind me because I didn't want her photographed. And I rather absurdly gave chase. And how I thought I was going to outrun a 20-something paparazzo while pushing a buggy. And my daughter was, calm down, Mum, calm down. Don't be silly, it doesn't matter. But it mattered hugely to me that the moment I set foot outside the door, my children were being photographed again. So the cumulative effect, it becomes quite draining.
Yes.
So yes, I did decide that it was time to take action when we had yet another instance.
Point C, this is at your page 16. You make it clear that you hadn't consented. Well, of course you hadn't consented to the photographs being taken. Point D is the long lens camera point and the reasonable expectation of privacy point. I mean, it might be said that the very fact that you need to use a long lens gives rise to some sort of presumption that you're invading privacy, but at least that's a factor which may be relevant. What about your point E at page 17? That you were not contacted prior to publication. What difference might that have made you think?
If I had been told what was coming, I think I could have said, well, I will take steps, possibly through the courts, possibly through the PCC. I don't know what it would have been if I had been notified, to prevent publication. We could have had a conversation. I could have restated my reasons for not wishing the children to be photographed. I mean, again, I think the point here is that I, like a lot of people who have agreed to give evidence at this inquiry, we are not looking for special treatment. We're looking for normal treatment. I don't regard myself as entitled to more than. I'm simply asking for the same as. And I'm particularly for asking for that on behalf of my children. So, yes, if I had been notified of the intention to print another photograph of my child, which neither I nor they had consented to, I would have been given an opportunity to explain my position again to the newspaper in question, and one would hope that would have carried some weight, but again, I wasn't notified, so I couldn't do that.
Though your position had been so clearly stated before, one wonders why there was any need to restate it, because everybody knew what it was.
This is exactly right. I mean, short of getting a skywriter, what can you do?
In paragraph 30, Miss Rowling, there were further photographs.
Yes.
Presumably long lens photographs, is this right? Your
Yes.
holiday in the US in July 2006. Photographs of your family and your 3 children. Is that right? The only thing that was
Yes, and
different
I would have to say here that I felt an idiot, a fool, this was literally the second time since 1998, I have put on a swimsuit on a public beach, twice. And on both of those times I've been photographed. And as I've already explained, on the first occasion I believed it was a private beach. On the second occasion, I think my guard was really down. We'd gone on holiday, we hadn't encountered any press. I assumed wrongly that we were... I forgot myself for a few moments, and the result was that I was long-lensed again. Initially, there were photographs only of me, and while I don't accept that, well, to call a spade, I'm a writer, so I don't really think that it's of any relevance or in any public interest to know what I look like in a swimsuit. But the general feeling of people around me was, leave it, and I felt the same way. I felt that I wasn't going to be able to succeed in preventing publication of that photograph of me. I was very concerned because when I saw the photograph, I knew they must have photographs of the children, because I knew that I was in very close proximity to the children all of that afternoon. And sure enough, the picture agency confirmed that they were holding a picture. They said one photograph of the children and agreed to destroy it, which I believe was done. I've never seen that photograph published.
Thank you. Did that give rise to a PCC complaint?
I think my recollection is that we didn't complain to the PCC, and I think that was because...
Well, we've seen no evidence.
My confidence in the PCC was fairly low at this point, so I decided my embarrassment wasn't worth the stress of going through the complaint, really.
And there was another incident, paragraph 30, subparagraph B at page 19, that in July 2007 a journalist from the Scottish Sun contacted the headmaster of your eldest daughter's school.
Yeah. Well, this is one of the incidents about which I feel most outraged. A journalist did not contact me, or I'm a highly contactable person. I have an agent, there's a PR firm that represents me, I have publishers. There are numerous ways to contact me very easily. No one contacted me. They went directly to the headmaster of my child's school. And as I say in my witness statement, the claim by the journalist was that my eldest daughter had distressed fellow pupils by revealing that Harry Potter died in the final Harry Potter book. And that the headmaster had received complaints from students and parents because their children were so upset by this. So my daughter was being characterised as some kind of bully, as using information from me to upset people. And there was not one word of truth in it. There had been no complaint. My daughter could not possibly have told anyone what happened in Book 7 because at her own request she didn't want to know. So I am very wary of speculating, but I have been on the receiving end of stories being put to one that probably, I would guess, the journalist is aware aren't true, but the strategy seems to be that they will surprise someone into saying something that they can then print. So, because I would say, why not contact me? But possibly there was a hope that the headmaster might inadvertently reveal that she had said something, or inadvertently reveal, well, that's not what I heard. I heard she says he survives. Who knows? But again, to approach my daughter's school, to me, was outrageous.
This was the time of wild speculation as to what happened at the end of the last book.
That's right, yes.
And then in subparagraph C, November 2007, more photographs, this time outside a coffee house, I think, in Edinburgh.
This one was just... I had taken my youngest daughter out, actually to buy her an advent calendar, which she was quite excited about. And We became aware that we were being photographed from across the street, and someone was with me and crossed the street and said to the photographer, "She's with her child, please stop." And the photographer refused. I don't know whether they got a clear shot of my youngest daughter. I've no idea. They claimed that they only saw her legs in the developed photographs. I don't know. The justification that I heard on that occasion was they believed I was wearing a fur coat, and I was wearing a woolen coat that I've never worn in public again.
Yes. The impact, please, on your children. Are you able to assist the inquiry with some insight into that?
Well, there's the particular impact on a given day. For example, my youngest daughter was very upset that we couldn't get her advent calendar because the photographer was clearly not going to desist. He'd refused in so many words. We had nowhere to go. So we got back in the car and we went home again. On a general note, the sense of being often unable to leave your house or move freely is obviously prejudicial to a normal family life. And certainly all three of my children have been aware of being suddenly pulled behind me, or I will split from the family group because I'm aware there's a photographer there, so you're hoping to draw them off. You take the kids that way, I'll go this way. So there's a general edginess sometimes when you're aware that there are people in the vicinity, and sometimes when there aren't, you start becoming jumpy. You start thinking that the person behaving in a peculiar manner near your house may be concealing a long lens. They might not be at all, but it's very unnerving feeling to know that you're being watched. So obviously that impacts my children.
May I move on to the second topic now, Ms. Rowling, which is privacy of home life. And this is related, of course, to the issue of personal security, which is obviously an obvious matter of concern to you. Can I deal with the matters in chronological order? Paragraph 41, I think, first.
Yes.
There may be a typographical error in the title. I think the right date is January 2005. Is that right?
That, I think so, yes.
There was an article published in the Scottish Daily Mail about conversion works which were taking place at your home. Mm-hmm. Your full address, without the postcode, was published, together with a large photograph of the house in question. Well, obviously, even without the postcode, the full address was enough to identify which house we were talking about. It's
yes.
Obvious. But so that it's clear, what happened as a result of this?
Well, as a direct... Sorry, could you ask me that question again?
Yes,
as a direct result
yes.
of this publication of this photograph, we asked them, we went to the newspaper and requested that they remove those details from their website and so on, and I believe they did do that.
Yes. But then in July 2005,
yes.
This time the Mirror, well, I think we're south of the border now, Ms. Rowling, is that right, published
yes.
an article printing the street names and photographs of 3 of your properties in England and Scotland, just before Harry Potter 6 this was.
Yes.
No public interest in that. And your concern, additionally, was that the article showed certain sort of security features, which
yes.
you quite rightly have in place.
Yes. For obvious reasons, I don't wish to go into detail here and now, although I'm happy to provide those details if they're relevant. But like virtually everyone in the public eye, I have on occasion been the target of unbalanced individuals. I don't want to go into details. And I mention this because my desire to keep the precise address of the property where I live with my family out of national newspapers is not because I'm being starry or precious. It's because on a number of occasions we have needed to, the police have been involved because of incidents or even threats. And so I think it's reasonable of me to wish that the papers would refrain from making my whereabouts so very, very identifiable. Clearly I have to live somewhere, and we've taken all reasonable precautions in this matter. Of course, locally it may be known where my house is, but again, I think a reasonable person would see a difference between my neighbours knowing which is my house, or my children's friends knowing where we live, and anyone who reads a national newspaper being able to find us with extraordinary ease.
What happened in this particular case, I mean, we'll deal with the PCC element in a moment, Ms. Rowling. It's paragraph 43 of your witness statement. The paper's position was that the addresses were in the public domain, so they could be found on the internet.
Well, in fact, we've taken every step that one can to make sure that we are not listed in the usual ways on registries that exist online. We can't prevent any individual putting our address online, but if that's the justification of newspapers using for then reprinting it in the national press, I think that's a fairly flimsy justification, but we have taken every reasonable precaution we can think of to protect our own privacy.
And then you point out that this is the third line of paragraph 43. The paper continued to disregard your feelings as 5 days later it published a picture of your eldest daughter as a baby.
Well, I would like to emphasise that what I'm about to say does not apply, of course, to the whole of the British press, but it is my experience that with certain sectors of the British press, if you lock horns with them in this way, if you protest or you make a complaint, then you can expect some form of retribution fairly quickly. And I thought the fact that in this case it was a picture of my child was put into the paper so very quickly after I'd asked them not to print my address, I thought that was spiteful, actually, just spiteful.
We move to a different title, the Evening Standard. October 2007 published photographs and information about your homes, including descriptions of the properties, details as to their history, details of the location, and details of security arrangements and pictures.
Yes.
There was a complaint, at least at a legal level. What was
Yes.
what was the upshot of that?
As my witness statement says, they wrote a one-line letter back saying they had noted the contents of my letter. Again, this doesn't apply to the whole of the press, but the attitude seems to be utterly cavalier. Indifference. What does it matter? You're famous. You're asking for it.
I think the final series of articles on this sort of theme, October-November 2007, in Mirror, the Daily Record and the Scottish Mail on Sunday, each all published articles that identified the precise location of your home in the Scottish countryside, showing the name of your home, the name of the neighbouring property, and the name of the small town in which you lived in.
Yes. And this, when we complained about this, the argument was, well, this information is in the public domain, but the joke of that is, to me, they put it into the public domain. What they were effectively saying was, well, you can't complain that we are printing photographs and the address because we've already printed photographs and the address.
Just so that's made clear, it had been put in the public domain the day before by the Mail on Sunday.
Yes.
In the
about which we
Scotland,
complained. Yes.
About which you complained.
Yes.
Therefore, it's entirely disingenuous, you say, for the Scottish Mail to rely on that argument, because it's just so absolutely clear they're part of the same newspaper group.
Exactly
is that
right, yes.
Yes. But does that disingenuous argument apply with equal force to the Mirror and the Daily Record? Could you help us with that?
Well, the Mirror and the Daily Record, they, as I say in my witness statement, they agreed to remove the articles from their archives, but they gave no guarantee that they wouldn't publish the information again at some point.
Now, there were complaints to the PCC resulting from some of these events, not all of them.
Yes.
So that we understand the position. It's paragraph 48 of your witness statement. Going back to the Mirror's publication in July 2005, which is what you talk about in paragraph 42, that your complaint there was upheld in part, I think. We have the adjudication under tab 3.
Yes. Well, as you, the key point on which they disagreed with me, they said they hadn't given enough information to identify the property, and I strongly disagree. And indeed, people said to me afterwards, "Oh, I know where you, I know where you live now. It is," and then they described that from the information in the newspaper, they were able entirely accurately to identify which house we bought. So, I must disagree with the papers on that matter.
The reasoning of the PCC, so that we're clear about it, is the part of the case which was upheld. The Commission was satisfied that the photograph and the caption contained sufficient information to identify the exact location of the property. So that was objectionable because it was too precise.
Yes.
But their argument was, well, in relation to the two other houses, it wasn't sufficiently precise, and therefore there wasn't a breach because one would have to carry out further inquiries in order to pinpoint the exact location.
But I feel in this respect the PCC isn't seeing the wood for the trees. All it needs is for 3 or 4 newspapers to provide partial information, and one is virtually giving a guided tour to my house. So if each complaint is going to be struck down because, well, it's almost your exact address but not quite, so we don't think that's good enough, then I feel that we're all in a fairly vulnerable position.
Called a jigsaw identification. A jigsaw identification.
Precisely the case, and I think exactly right. I don't feel that the PCC is taking I think a little conveniently not taking a holistic view of the matter.
We see a similar theme, whether it's right or wrong or not. You clearly say it's wrong, in relation to the 2007 publications under our tab 4, because your complaints are not upheld really for the self-same reason, that the identification is not sufficiently specific. If you just look at the 4 corners of the article itself. But you say, well, the answer to that is let's feed in other information which is readily available. Some of it has been disseminated by the press itself, and it doesn't take too many steps or filling in of the pieces before the picture is there.
Literally a click of the mouse. And in fact, when we bought a new house in Edinburgh, one newspaper gave really oh no, I'm sorry, I'm mistaken. It was our previous house in Edinburgh. Yes, in fact, I believe it was this precise case we've just been talking about. The PCC said, well, there wasn't sufficient information to identify the precise location of the Edinburgh house. However, someone, I believe abroad, saw the article and said, but I know exactly what... They instantly knew which house it was, and they said, I used to live there, and gave the whole address plus the postcode. So they were able, on the basis of what they'd read, to put everything into the public domain. And again, I feel that little, if any, weight is given to that, or has been given to that, when the PCC looks at these matters.
Did that person put the address in
They
the
put the entire address, down to the postcode, And I think it was done quite innocently by that person. I think they were rather excited to realise I was living in the house that they'd lived in a few years previously. I think it was a young person who did it. But the whole address was on the internet within 2 days, and my lawyer was able to contact that person and say to them, please could you delete this, which they did. But again, in the meantime, how many people had seen the whole address?
Can I just understand where you say the boundary lines are? What do you say is permissible and what do you say is impermissible on this issue?
On this issue,
Yeah.
I don't see why it is in the public interest to know exactly where I live. I mean, clearly I can't put an invisibility cloaking device over myself and my house, nor do I wish to. I want to live in as normal way as possible, but it is not normal for anyone, famous or not famous, for their address to be known to millions of newspaper readers or users of the internet. So that is where I would draw the line. And again, and I would, if I may make one further point. As I said, I moved out of the first house we ever owned because the photographs of the house precisely identified its location. There was the number on the door and the street name was on the building. So an image can do as much, if not much more damage than even a postal address in print.
Thank you. Now the third area you wish to address is the issue of fair treatment in the press, and this starts at paragraph 50, Ms. Rowling. In paragraph 51, you're referring to a report in the Independent newspaper regarding the Operation Motorman investigation. But you believe you were the target of Mr. Whittemore, is that correct?
Well, yes, I've now had the files made available to me, so I know that I was a target, yes.
The figure that Mr. Whittemore charged for his services you give was £655. Are you able to assist us, just in general terms, as to the nature of the information he had blagged? I mean, if you don't want to tell us, please don't, but just that we get a general idea, perhaps, of the nature of the information. But if there's any concern about doing so, I won't press it.
I'm happy to say what I know, and I say that because I don't know part of what he had. He appears to have been making investigations with people regarding me, with people whose names I don't recognise. So I don't know what he was after there, and I don't know what he was searching for. But the bulk of what he appeared to be trying to do was to track down people related to me. For what purpose, I couldn't tell you. But yes, he seemed to be making extensive inquiries about my extended family.
Thank you. And whereas you say in paragraph 52 of your witness statement that you're awaiting a substantive response from the ICO, have I understood your evidence correctly that you've now received some sort of response?
There is I may need to ask my lawyers to provide details on this, but I believe there is additional information to come.
Well, it may or may not be important. You've given us, I think, the gist
Yes.
of
what I've seen so far.
what
yes.
you've seen so far. In paragraph 53, you give another example of
Yes.
blagging, which actually is quite characteristic because we've heard similar evidence about it this morning, namely someone from the post office telephoning you and explaining that they have a package but no address.
Well, I recalled while preparing this statement 2 instances of blagging that I know about. When I was blagged, I actually realised halfway through giving personal details that I was being blagged. It was shortly after we moved into the first house that we owned, and I believe the journalists didn't know where I'd moved to. somehow, I don't know how, had my telephone number but did not know my exact address. So I received a phone call allegedly from the post office, and this man said to me, I am from the post office, I've got a package here for you, what's your address? So I began to speak, and then I said, wait a moment, you're from the post office, well, what does it say on the package? And there was a moment's embarrassed silence, and he hung up.
Well, the other
which
story,
didn't seem...
the story we heard, I think, in your absence from another witness this morning was that he said, well, the mobile phone has been left on the ripped paper, and in that case, the information was provided.
I
Anyway.
can understand. Well,
So your story, your account has resonance
I understand.
with some evidence that we actually heard this morning.
Well, my husband was less fortunate than me, and we were not married. We had just started a relationship. My husband had just moved jobs from one hospital to another, and fortunately for the blagger, but not fortunately for Neil, the blagger pretended to be from the tax office, and my husband was expecting a communication from the tax office so that he could adjust his tax code. Anyway, he's a busy man at a hospital. He gets a call, he takes the call, they say we're from a tax office, and he gave them everything. He confirmed his address, he confirmed his pay grade, he confirmed, I believe, his national insurance number. And it was the next day or the day after that he opened his front door at 6 a.m. to go to the hospital, and flashes went off in his face, and the paparazzi had found him. So that was a not very nice introduction to being involved with someone famous. Oh, I should say that there was subsequently a legitimate contact with the tax office, so that's how we know that the first call was not legitimate.
All right.
And then you touch on phone hacking issues. The position at the moment is that, as far as you're aware, but only on the basis of information and evidence examined to date, there's nothing to connect you with phone hacking, is that right?
No, I barely used a mobile phone in the 90s, which now seems like a very smart move, but it wasn't deliberate.
Now deal with issues of as much commercial confidence as personal privacy, leaked information, Miss Rowling, your books. Paragraph 58, I think we're now on Harry Potter 5, as you say, and in June 2003 the Sun apparently came into possession of 2 copies of the book which was stolen from the printers.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about what happened next, please?
I believe the story was that an unemployed gentleman had found a copy of Harry Potter in a field. I find that story rather difficult to believe, but there you are. So we'd taken every reasonable step to try and prevent pre-publication leaks, and now the manuscript was in the possession of a tabloid newspaper. So we took out, I'm not an expert on this by any means, but we took out what's called a John Doe injunction against unknown persons to prevent, because we didn't know how many journalists at this point had the manuscript, to prevent publication of the contents.
Well, those representing Associated News wish it to be made clear that, as far as I understand the position, the injunction was sought and obtained only in relation to the activities of the Sun and not the Daily Mail and the Mirror. Are you aware of the exact position there, Miss Rowling?
Well, it's my belief, but I would need to check with my lawyers, that a John Doe injunction is taken out against whoever may have a copy of the information. I think that's...
Yes.
It continues in paragraph 60. What happened with the return of the copies? Can you help us there, please?
A great deal happened. There was no straightforward handover of the book. A review of the book was published, which really was a way of publishing some of the contents, paraphrased. In spite of the fact that they had promised not to reveal, in court, they had promised not to reveal anything that was in the book. The book was photographed. Those photographs obviously went into the paper. And so we had to go back to court to try and enforce cooperation with the original injunction.
You tell us that the Sun were trying to turn this into a photo opportunity.
Yes, I mean this is to me a classic example of. Again, I accept this is far from being all journalists, but there is a section of the press that sees opportunities in a situation like this, and I felt I was being blackmailed. What they really wanted was a photograph of me gratefully receiving back the stolen manuscript. So I was being asked to pose with the book.
There was a similar sort of sequence of events, but perhaps less serious, but you'll tell me if that's right, in relation to another book, maybe. So I'm not sure whether it's the sixth or the seventh one.
That's the sixth one, yes.
Okay.
Yes, I would agree that this was less serious. This is opinion. My opinion is that if one shows oneself prepared to take a stand, then I suppose I would say that the press has maybe been wary of me latterly, in that they, on certain issues, obviously my children's privacy being the most important one, but that, well, crudely I suppose, they're wary because they're aware that I can afford to pay for expensive lawyers. And that's a sad reflection on the state of affairs, that I therefore receive a kind of treatment on occasion that I think is not available to the ordinary person. So it was a less serious situation on the sixth book, I think, because they had seen because they had seen that we were prepared to defend the book vigorously in 2003.
Thank you. We move on to false attribution in paragraph 63. In Hello magazine, an article in 2001 or thereabouts, claiming to be a rare and exclusive interview,
Yes.
but one which never occurred.
Yes, and I think that people might think, well, that's quite a banal occurrence, but in fact it's not. If you are trying, as I am, to make it quite clear that my personal life, my family life, is out of bounds, then the perception that I have granted an interview to a magazine that is primarily notorious for going into people's houses, photographing them with their families, hearing personal details of their private lives, and I censor no one, by the way, for doing those interviews. I don't think that's an awful thing to do. It simply happens that that's not something I wish to do. And so the magazine asserting that I had done it, I feared, would then be used as justification for further invasion. When you gave an interview to Hello magazine, you are prepared to sell your private life in this way. And as is clear from my statement, that what they had done was taken an article from a different paper and repackaged it, from a different source and repackaged it.
And then you had a lot of difficulty with the apology. It took time, and you feel they reneged on the agreement you had with them, and it was published less prominently than.
Yes, they were very,
to.
very difficult to deal with on that occasion. They dragged their feet for a very long time. They didn't want to admit that they'd done what we knew they had done, and the apology was minuscule.
In paragraph 60, a claim in defamation. Could you just tell us a little bit about that, please, Ms. Rowling?
Yes,
one of your characters, I think.
Yes, this was really quite horrible because it caused real distress to my oldest child. The Daily Express published an article saying that I had based an unpleasant character in the Harry Potter books on my ex-husband. This was wholly untrue. And their justification for writing this was that I had said, while doing a book reading with a group of children, and I remember the event, it was at the Edinburgh Book Festival, and it was very pleasant. And I'm often asked, do you base characters on real people? It was a really throwaway comment. I said, humorously, that the character of Gilderoy Lockhart was based on someone with whom I had lived briefly. Now, that's true, but that person probably can't even remember that we were ever flatmates. This is a long time ago. So I felt quite clean about saying that. I'd identified no one, and as I say, the acquaintanceship was so fleeting, I didn't feel I was doing anything damaging. And again, this was in the context of speaking to children about the creation of a book. So I was relaxed and not expecting what came next, which was this article. And not only did they say that I'd based this character on my ex-husband, they were clearly depicting me as the kind of vindictive person who would use a best-selling book to vilify anyone against whom they had a grudge, which is simply nonsense. So I had to sit down with my eldest daughter, because they're talking about her biological father, and say to her, this isn't true, I would never do this, there is no point of resemblance between this man and your father. And while she was very understanding about this and said, I know you wouldn't, I know you didn't, I believe you, it was a horrible conversation to have. And, of course, there's what happens outside the house. There's what happens when other children, many of whom have read Harry Potter, tell my daughter that her father was the basis for this unpleasant character. And that can't be recalled, even though, because children don't tend to read the apologies newspapers put in. So that misinformation caused real emotional hurt, which I'm sure is a matter of indifference to the person who wrote it, but as you can tell, quite a big matter to me.
Yes. And it resulted in an apology. Can you tell us anything about the apology, for example, where it was printed and its size and what might have been said?
I truly can't remember, but I know that it was small, and it certainly didn't occupy the same kind of space that the original article did.
You deal, paragraph 61 we've covered, paragraph 62, a separate defamation issue. Could you help us with that one, please?
Now this was, I mean, not untrue from beginning to end. There was an allegation printed that I was taking legal action against a man who was writing fan literature. It was simply untrue, and in fact, I had never heard of him until this accusation was made against me.
Thank you. And then another defamatory article, this is paragraph 63, published in the Mail on Sunday, Hello, the Herald, the Scottish Sun, the Scottish Daily Express and the Daily Star Scotland, concerning the purchase of a house in town. The basic point there is that you paid well over the odds, it was alleged, in order to force the seller to move out early.
Yes, the original story said that I walked into this house, which in actual fact is our family home now, that I glanced at 2 rooms, that I then offered a vast amount of money to get the owner out virtually instantly, because I wished to host a Christmas party in this house. It's utterly, utterly untrue. We looked around the house in exactly the way any normal person would look around a house they were intending to live in. We took our children to look around the house. There was no question of throwing money at anyone to make them leave. We had a very amicable relationship with the seller, who moved out in a normal time period. And actually, I never held any kind of Christmas party that year because we just moved in. So it was nonsense from beginning to end. Again, some people might think, well, it's not a big deal. Well, firstly, it's depicting me as a very arrogant person who is unaware of the value of money, who uses it to bend anyone to her will, which I do not believe to be the case. But it's also, you're putting a version of, or the newspaper is putting a version of me and my family into the public domain that has an effect on my children, who are then asked about the house that we bought when we barely looked at it, and the huge party we sold, and how your mother just throws money at people to move them out of their houses. And this is hurtful stuff.
There were a number of apologies, but you point out that 4 weeks later the Scottish Times published the very same defamatory allegations, later denied that they were
defamatory. I think this just builds a picture of how very difficult it is. It's to stop defamatory articles of any nature, because no prior notification that this was going to be printed, no opportunity to correct the story, but also it does spread like fire. You're stamping in one area and someone else is lighting a fire over here, and you say to them, well, person A has already accepted that's completely untrue. Well, we don't accept that it's untrue.
Thank you. I mean, the last matter you cover, paragraph 64, there was an inquiry by the Sunday Times of your PR agents, this is quite recent, to inquire about the development of your Scottish urban home and the type of trees you were going to use.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that matter, please?
Well, this was quite a bizarre story, really. We did receive notice on this occasion that the Scottish Sunday Times wished to run an article about what we were planting in our garden. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't really understand why that was of any public interest at all. Then we were told that they were running an article on non-native species and their effect on their environmental impact. And as everything we were using in our garden had been in Scotland for about 5,000 years, I still couldn't understand why we were being referenced in the article. And when we said, well, no, we're not minded to let you come and look at our trees, the journalist said, well, I will come and see for myself then. I'll come onto your property, I assume. It was the effect was quite aggressive.
Yes.
We've actually, if you don't mind, we've skated over an article, and I'm finding it difficult to find it in my bundle here. That was about my husband, I think, in the Sunday Mirror.
Certainly.
I'm going to need to find it, but I really did want to talk about that one.
What we'll do, Ms. Rowling, we'll find that, come back to it, allow you to deal with that in your own way, as completely as you like.
Thank you.
Sure, a note will be passed to me. But what I'd like to do is put to you a point that News International, on behalf of the Sunday Times, wish me to raise in relation to the non-native species article, and then we'll come back to the Sunday Mirror, if that's acceptable. Have you been shown a copy of the piece in the Sunday Times?
I wasn't aware that anything had appeared.
Yes. This is a general piece, apparently, indeed, as we can see in the Sunday Times on the 14th of August of this year. Garden experts wage war on plant invaders. And
yes, I see myself in this little article.
The general theme is that apparently the Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh, is to investigate the behaviour of every plant in its collection, and amid concern, more than 100 species may pose a threat to wildlife, and these presumably are non-native species. And then on the right-hand side of the column, you'll see among those with a fondness for non-native plants is JK Rowling, who plans to introduce several varieties at her Edinburgh home. Then they're listed. They include home oak, evergreen native to the Mediterranean, which is invading southeast England. It's listed as a plant to avoid. So the suggestion there is that these plants or trees aren't yet there, but you're planning to introduce them. I think that's clear from what's being said. Do you have a comment on that?
I It's just ludicrous. I truly... I find it ludicrous. How is this I mean, I do not... I don't recognise these plants they're saying I'm going to plant, and as I've been very involved in the garden, clearly I've either overlooked something important or they are mistaken, and I tend to think they're mistaken.
It goes on. I appreciate this is rather difficult if you've not seen this, Ms. Rowling. A spokesman for Patience and Highmore, I'm not going to ask whether you know that recognise the name, the architecture firm helping to design Rowling's garden, said the council planning department is happy with the design and selection of species. Well, there it is.
The News International's position is that the information they obtained was from publicly available planning documents, which may well be consistent with what we see in the final paragraph.
Yes.
And secondly, that you were, they say, offered an opportunity to comment through your PR company, and the comment came from the architects, as we see reported.
Yes, I see.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. I wasn't aware this had appeared. In fact, I thought that they weren't going to run the article, so this has been slightly sprung on me, but I don't really know what to say about it.
Well, we've coped with it. We've now put it together, right?
Okay. Can I just check before we go back to the point you wanted to raise,
yes,
that we were covering the ground. Yes. There is an article I'm asked to draw to your attention, but it may be that it simply hasn't been the opportunity for you properly to consider this, and therefore it's not something I
was just given it before I came up here too.
What?
Well, this came to me very, very late from the Daily Mail. It's probably something, if we're going to explore at all, you should have the opportunity to look at. I don't think it's right. I can really press it now without the witness having even had the chance to read it.
I am happy to answer questions on this. I don't know what's coming, but I am. I sort of skimmed through it just before I came up here to sit down. I'd just seen it, so I'm happy to talk about it.
Can I see it? So it's an article 12 and a half years ago.
Yes.
All right.
Let me see if I can put the point in the way that others would wish me to put it. Okay.
Yep.
The sequence of events, my understanding is this: that after your first Harry Potter book, which was, of course, in 1997,
yes,
you were interviewed by Angela Levin, then of the Daily Mail. Various personal matters are dealt with. It's not necessary to go into them at all, but the article was not published at that time, as we can see. It was not published until the 9th of July 1999. Are you with me so far, Ms. Rowling? This was published apparently after the second Harry Potter novel was published.
Sorry, no, this is 99, so that would have been around the time that the third book was published. The picture here is of the first book, but I see the date on it is 1999, so that would have been when the third book was published, not the second.
Okay, so I shall notionally correct...
Yes, in fact, it says here, her new book, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, is the third in her series.
So I shall notionally correct what I've been told. I was told it was the second. In fact, it's the third.
Yeah.
The point that I'm asked to put is that your publishers then telephoned the Daily Mail to say that you were very angry at the publication of this article. Is that right?
No.
No.
I do not recall ever asking my publishers to tell a newspaper I was angry. As you know, you told me I would be asked this question just shortly before we came into court, and I've been racking my brains as to what this refers to, I have no memory ever of complaining through my publishers to any newspaper. That's not the way I would complain to a newspaper. I would go to the PCC, or I would go to a lawyer, I suppose, if it was something terrible. Moreover, I have now read this article, and I can't see that there's anything in here that I would have complained about. It seems to be largely factual. It's all information that I had already discussed in other interviews in the early part of my career as a published writer. So I cannot see what I would have been angry about. But then, while racking my brains, it occurred to me. In 1999, when the third Harry Potter book was about to be published, I did tell my publishers that I did not wish to do any press. And the reason for that was that the phenomenon, if I can call it that, had really taken off. The books were selling very, very fast. I don't absolutely love giving interviews. Obviously, it depends on the circumstances, but it's not my very favourite thing. And I just felt that giving more press felt like overkill. So I said to them, can we not just say, well, the books are selling very well, and not do a big marketing campaign? And they were very understanding of that. And in fact, I did one interview, which was an interview on Radio 4 with Jim Naughty, I think, and some children. I think that what seems to have happened is that the Mail has published this article when I hadn't given them the interview at that time. However, I made no complaint about that. It may be that someone at my publisher said to the Mail, but she's not doing press. But I never gave instruction for a complaint to be made.
Yes.
So I'm slightly mystified.
Yes.
But actually, if one reads it, it's information that you've already described. You're content to recognise is in the public domain.
Yes,
except that it names your daughter.
It names my daughter, to whom I'd already dedicated the first book.
Oh, so people know the name of your daughter. All right. All right.
So I think we're beginning to understand where we are with this piece. It's perhaps not advancing the sum total of our knowledge in the context of press culture, practices and ethics. I
understand entirely why it was felt appropriate to put it forward.
Yes.
Right.
Thank you.
Now there was one other article.
I'm having difficulty, Miss Rowling, finding this reference, and
But I know it's in here.
Well, Miss Rowling, you said you wanted to mention it, so mention it.
Thank you, sir.
Tell me about it.
Thank you. Miss Malone wrote a short piece in which she alleged, in very vehement language, that I had married a doctor and doubtless had been attracted to him partly because of his job, and he was someone who was doing a very worthwhile job, and that my husband had now given up his job to be, and I remember it quite vividly, at the beck and call of his obscenely rich wife. The language was really very strong, and no phone call had been made to me or any of my representatives or to my husband to check the veracity of these statements. And the truth was that my husband, in 10 years of marriage, has never taken any time off work except for family holidays, and there has never been a period when he hasn't been working or on study leave or something similar. And this was another instance of I feel extremely strongly about this, and I wish to mention this because my husband clearly is not a celebrity, and he has no wish to be a celebrity. And again, this was damaging misinformation, because his colleagues, those who weren't in his immediate vicinity and aware that he was still working at the hospital where he was working, believed it. They thought he had indeed thrown in a career that he worked at so
you mean in former hospitals, not where he was then working, presumably?
He had changed hospitals, which seemed to be the reason Ms Malone assumed that because he disappeared from one hospital, he must have given up work entirely to be at my beck and call. And I would, again, one of the reasons why I was keen to give evidence here today is because of the effect on those people who have the dubious pleasure of being married to, related to, or to live next door to someone of interest to the press. And I felt that that article was vicious. It was clearly wholly untrue, and it was sending a horrible message out to my husband's colleagues, some of whom he might wish to work with or for at some point. Yes, we did receive an apology, but it's the old case of a lie can spread around the world before the truth has got its boots on. There were still people for some time who believed my husband had indeed decided to give up work to become house husband to his authoress wife. And although I think nowadays there are a few people who still believe that, I can't know. Anyway.
Well, I understand why you wanted to tell me about it.
Thank you.
Now, in your conclusion, you sum up your position, Ms. Rowling.
Yes.
Very helpfully. Can I ask you then a more general question, perhaps born out of your experiences as you have explained them to us? Do you have any ideas, recommendations or suggestions which you would invite the inquiry to carry away with it, particularly as a result of what you have told the inquiry this afternoon?
This is not a compulsory question. It's an opportunity, that's all.
I do not have any very fully worked up ideas. I can only say that I feel the PCC is toothless, that it offers very little in the way of sanctions to newspapers, that it's a wrist-slapping exercise at best, that we need, and I should say I'm vehemently opposed to state control of the media, of course, as I think everyone who is going to sit in this chair is, but I do feel that we need a body that has teeth, that can impose sanctions. And I agree with several of the people who have spoken to the inquiry before me when they say that prior notification would prevent a significant amount of damage, particularly where defamatory articles are concerned. Apart from that, I can't pretend I have a magical answer.
Yes,
No Harry Potter joke intended. That slipped out.
I would have been perfectly content if you had one. Thank you very, very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
A long afternoon. Thank you.